Thank you so much for joining us at the Project Censored radio show. We're very glad right now to be joined by Leona Morgan, who's a Diné anti-nuclear agitator who's been fighting nuclear colonialism since 2007. She is co-founder of Hall No and a graduate student at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And Hall No is a volunteer Indigenous-led group collaborating with Indigenous communities and leaders, environmental organizations, and community-based advocates working to stop nuclear colonialism in the Southwest. Leona, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I want to start off by talking about the Pinyon Plain, or the Canyon Mine. It's a proposed mine on the edge of the Grand Canyon, where Energy Fuels Incorporated says, according to the website hallno.org, it can start transporting millions of tons of radioactive ore at any moment. So let's just start with an obvious question. I feel like it sounds like a joke, but the Grand Canyon should be a protected site, even under the very bad colonialist purview of protection. Could you talk a little bit about the protections that exist or don't, either through federal law or in Navajo Nation, that butts up against this proposed mine, and how, for instance, things like that are listed on the website, like the Diné Natural Resources Protection Act of 2005 or the Radioactive Materials Transportation Act of 2012, are full of loopholes regarding this?
Yes, thank you for the question. Let me just start by introducing myself. So traditionally, we like to share our clans. So I'll just start there and then answer your questions. Yat e shik e do shidina ashe e Leona Morgan in chia torich eating in schlit sana bitli bashish chin kia ani dashe tohoglini dashanella. Yeah, so right now we're looking at I'm just referring to it as a global treasure. I think everyone in the United States, I'm sure, knows about the Grand Canyon, and I think globally it is also a place that is very special on Mother Earth. So regarding the protections, recently President Biden signed a national monument which creates this area that is almost 1 million acres that will prohibit new uranium mining forever. But the thing about it is this is following an Obama mineral withdrawal that was created in 2012. And so that Obama mineral withdrawal, it protected the area from uranium mining for about 20 years. And so this national monument made that permanent. And so the thing people are not talking about is there are at least 11 mines with valid existing rights that were grandfathered in. And so they can still go forward. Of these 11, about half of them may be mined out. They're done. They need to be in decommissioning and cleaning up. The others, I'm not sure exactly, but it could be between 1 and 5, maybe, probably 3 potential new mines in that area. And the one that we're watching, Hall No, has been working to stop what was once called, everyone is familiar with Canyon Mine. And so now it's Pinyon Plain, and this is very common for any industry to rebrand and confuse people. So Pinyon Plain Canyon Mine is one of the mines that is grandfathered in and can move forward. And this is a mine that recently started on January 8th. So that's a whole nother topic of questions to get into. But you were asking about the loopholes. So going back to the Navajo Nation laws. So it's a funny thing that I as an Indigenous person, I want to say, and I have been saying for years, that our sovereignty is the thing that's going to win all the time. I mean, I'm just a single person. We have environmental groups, conservation groups, mostly non-native, grassroots Indigenous groups. But I do think the tribes have a lot of power. And I do think as Indigenous nations, having 575 or however many across the country right now, those federally recognized tribes, right now, this is what I'm learning with my personal tribe. I can't really speak to all of the federally recognized tribes, but I'm wondering if this affects everybody, because what we're seeing is how limited our jurisdiction is. So when the Navajo Nation makes laws for example, no uranium mining. We've been sacrificed, we've been used, our language, our minerals, everything, for World War II, now our water, a lot of water is going to cities like Phoenix and other places, our coal, so we consider this, creating a resource colony out of the Navajo Nation, that there's so much extraction and commodification of our Mother Earth, going to power the outside world and to benefit economically and to for quality of life, when at home our people are suffering and dying, breathing in contaminated radioactive things in the air, and who knows what in the water. I mean, there's fracking in Eastern Navajo. There was just an oil spill in Shiprock. That's huge. This was just recently, and people will talk about the Gold King mine spill that got a lot of attention, but there's all these things happening all the time, like bad cleanup of uranium mines, new uranium mining, even though we have this law. So going back to our jurisdiction, we have a lot of limitations when it comes to working within the colonial structure. So it seems that if tribes are going to depend on their quasi-sovereignty bestowed on them by the US federal government, we're never going to win in that game. And so to really uphold sovereignty means to step outside of that. It means to really honor, what you are as a nation. So as Navajo, I'm going to say Navajo Nation, but, as Diné people, we are often at odds with the Navajo Nation government. And so right now, we have 2 Navajo Nation laws specifically designed to protect us from uranium and uranium transport. But we don't have jurisdiction outside of Navajo Indian country proper. And in the east side, on the eastern side, this gets really complicated with the checkerboard area. It's a little bit more black and white. I guess, I don't know if you can say that, but I'm actually from the eastern side of Navajo, and all of this is impacting the western side. So I'm I'm a little bit new to the area. I've been working with Hall No since 2016. We started this, and we did this tour in 2017. But the mine wasn't completed until recently, about, in the last couple of years. One of our co-founders, who has been probably the only person really monitoring the mine over probably the last decade, Klebanali, was alerting us that the construction at the mine was almost complete. And so we have been aware that this was happening, and trying to let folks know and reporting it to, let's say, various Navajo Nation committees or individuals. I mean, I can say that personally. I have told individuals in the Navajo Nation before the monument was signed what was happening, and people seem to not have any clue what I was talking about. Maybe I have no idea if they were not educated on it or believed me. I mean, we were being called alarmists. People were not taking us seriously, even though we did an event for Indigenous Peoples Day, kind of alerting folks to we need to up the awareness here because things are moving. And then again on December 13th, we did an event that's on our website. So as activists, we are fully aware of the limitations of the colonial structure, yet I still believe the Navajo Nation has an obligation to use whatever it has to protect us. And so that's why, we're still pushing on our government. We're still pushing on the Navajo Nation president, and a lot of especially the Navajo Nation chapters. We have 110 in the whole Navajo Nation. There's 110, and the Western Agency has 18 who will be mostly impacted, because the haul route of the uranium would go from the mine, which is south of the Grand Canyon, and then there's 2 routes, and so we don't know which one for sure they would use. And so both of them will be primarily through Navajo Nation. So about 300 miles. So it's a major federal action, to allow radioactive transport over 300 miles in mostly indigenous communities that has a law against this. So it's a direct violation of our law that the Arizona government, the company, and of course the United States government doesn't respect, the wishes of the Navajo Nation when it comes to uranium stuff. I mean, we can look at prime examples. RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. The United States just dropped it. It was set to be passed with the National Defense Authorization Act in December. And yeah, the United States failed us. They will not compensate workers, downwinders, people from the Trinity test, from their own radioactive experiments, testing, and all of the stuff they did to all United States citizens, not just indigenous people. Radiation doesn't discriminate. Fallout goes everywhere. So yeah, the other thing the US did is to push a lot of really bad cleanup. And so right now, there's a lot of communities fighting and having internal conflict because the United States wouldn't listen to the very first requests of community members, which is to take the uranium outside, off of the Navajo Nation. Some of the contamination, most of it just gets buried in place. So some of the most contaminated stuff, we've been in general, folks are saying, take it away. We didn't make this mess. We didn't, we weren't educated on the total impact by the United States when they started mining uranium. And so now we're living with the consequences of mining that started in the 40s and 50s. And so still about estimated 15,000 to 20,000 abandoned uranium mines across the country because uranium was not regulated. There were no laws to clean up. The EPA didn't exist until the 70s. So the uranium boom was like the 50s to the 70s. So most of the mining that occurred was highly unregulated. And a lot of companies, took their profit and ran, and we're stuck with the mess still today. And so just like the Trinity folks living where the first atomic test was done, they're living with a lot of cancers today. And they were really, really pushing for these RECA amendments to expand, to include them, but also to extend it, because RECA is supposed to sunset. It was supposed to sunset in 2022, but it only got a 2-year extension, which ends this July. So there's literally, less than a year for folks to try to help to get together something for RECA. That's a whole nother issue and work that I don't do, but I think it's imperative that folks understand the United States will put trillions of dollars into its military industrial complex and its nuclear energy and weapons industries and all of these facilities. I mean, a lot of them are in New Mexico, yet they don't put the money out there for cleanup or for healthcare, for the long-term impacts that our people and people across the country have been suffering. Or let's say people in other countries like the Marshall Islands, they were severely impacted by the United States nuclear testing. So they should also be included in RECA. So these are things the United States still need to deal with and address, the abandoned uranium mines, compensation. But I just want to finish up answering your question about these loopholes, because again, we have no uranium, no new uranium, and then no transport of new uranium. But of course, during cleanup, that it doesn't outlaw cleanup transportation. But the thing is, a lot of the loopholes, what we're talking about in Eastern Agency, it's completely split up and fractionalized because of the Dawes Act, or the General Allotment Act, and then the railroads coming through, or the railroad. But in Arizona, what we're dealing with is the mine starts, the transport would start at the mine, which is U.S. Forest Service it's inside of U.S. Forest Service lands, which brings up again different protections and trust responsibilities of the federal government that are not being properly carried out. So anyways, the transport will start at the mine, go down or across through private land. So if it goes, the first route, it would go south to I-40 and then east to Flagstaff and then start cutting up through like for a couple miles, it'll go through the city of Flagstaff. And that's important because those are city streets under the city of Flagstaff. It's, I think, about a mile. But the rest of the route, it's U.S. highways all the way to the mill, and it goes through Navajo Nation as well as through Hopi, a little bit of Hopi Nation. And then when it gets to the mill, there's some more Navajo chapters, but then it's also Ute country. So there's also Indigenous people over there. The thing is, we don't have jurisdiction on the U.S. highways. So even though the Navajo Nation, most of the route is through Navajo Nation, I guess, going back to being under these colonial structures, the entire treaty system, depending, going from east to west, the colonization, settler colonialism that occurred, it just got better, the farther west the United States went. And so, I mean, Alaska and Hawaii are really good examples of how different, the impacts were from the East Coast to the West. So for us, apparently they say, this is totally where I disagree with all of the Navajo Nation law and, the US law and all of that, is because as Indigenous people, Diné people call it fundamental law, and they actually codified it, which is kind of funny or a little bit ironic, but fundamental law is basically our cultural teachings. So our obligations as Diné people. And so we as Diné people, five-fingered people, there's a lot of stuff that is entailed within our everything about who we are, living within the four sacred mountains, how we operate, here on Mother Earth, and just everything that we are as our existence. And I'm just speaking for ourselves, but the Havasupai put out a beautiful statement about Pinyon Plain mine and how this is a threat to their entire existence. So for us as Diné people, we don't mine uranium, we don't mine coal, we see, everybody knows today water is life, and how we treat water and everything about water, what we're doing to it, what we're doing to ourselves, these are direct violations of fundamental law. And so, I know not all, I'm not running to the east every morning. I'm probably not doing every single teaching. Of course, I'm learning my language. And I think a lot of our generation, we're really wanting to come back home, and we want to come back home to a place that has, that is still there. We don't want to be coming back to a bunch of radioactive waste sites and contaminated rivers and things like that. So right now, with fundamental law, as Diné people, we have an obligation to protect our Mother Earth. And so even though we don't have jurisdiction on the highway, that doesn't matter. This is our home. We've been here for thousands of years. We have we inherent human rights, not because the United Nations or anyone else gave us human rights. We exist, and within that, we have a right to protect ourselves and our future. So, however people want to do that. Right now, I'm an organizer with Hallno, and we always had a two-pronged approach. One is action and one is policy. And we're kind of struggling a little bit. One of our co-founders, who was highly focused on the action piece, we lost Klebanali recently, and it's just interesting timing how the mine started 10 days later. And so I really want to, I'm trying to wrap my finger around how did this happen this way, that, it was just, I don't know, a perfect storm, that the price of uranium is over $100 a pound. The National Defense Authorization Act included the Nuclear Fuel Security Act. RECA didn't pass. So all these things that are happening, Biden getting 21 other countries to triple nuclear energy by 2050 because everyone still thinks it's clean or somehow going to save us from climate change, and just totally ignoring the front end or the back end and only counting, the carbon footprint at the nuclear power plant. So all of these things, everything that's happening today, it's really interesting, the situation, because I'm more concerned about if we don't stop Pinyon Plain, it's just like a pinprick. Like they're opening up this whole new wave, or like this new uranium boom, which is what that's what my primary concern is how is this one mine going to impact everything? I don't think it's a very strong company at all, but the fact that they started, you know, it is showing something. I mean, it took them what their permit is from 1986, but we have a lot of footage that shows the mine wasn't even complete until just recently. I mean, we have aerial footage, we have photos. So through Hall Nose monitoring, we are out there literally just watching the mine and telling people, hey, they started. We informed, I personally informed entities at the Navajo Nation before the federal government sent proper notification to the tribes. The company emailed the U.S. Forest Service on January 8th in the evening. And then on January 9th, about 3:30 in the afternoon, the tribal liaison emailed certain entities at the tribe. So there's a whole hierarchy of how this national monument has created, and I guess this is common for other national monuments. They have like a tribal commission. And so there's certain members, certain people in tribes that are responsible to be in these bodies for the protection of our everything, for our culture, for our, physical health and things like that, economy, whatever. But sometimes these people, maybe they don't check their email, maybe they compromise, maybe they're not communicating with us, the people, about these decisions they're making on our behalf. I'm not sure how this national monument got passed, because I understand several of our officials weren't aware that there were valid existing rights. They thought the national monument was going to stop all uranium mining forever. And you can see by the Navajo Nation president's press release, it has no mention. It's the August 8th press release. There's absolutely no mention of valid existing rights or Pinyon Plain. So I'm not sure how the Navajo Nation signed on to this. That's something I'm still trying to get to. But I do know there are some people doing something about it within the tribe. And so it's just how bureaucracy works, I guess.
I'm basically curious, like, what has the response been since Hall No made it clear that mining has started, and also like what are the chains of, the colonial command in terms of, okay, this is happening now, who's going to enforce it, who's going to shut it down? What does that look like?
Those are great questions. I'm not sure personally. There should be some clear organizational chart or some way for anybody to be able to know where to get information about this, especially if big trucks with tons of uranium covered only with tarps are driving through their area. I mean, how do people know what's going on if there's no alerts? There's uranium. People say there's radioactive and uranium transports across the country all the time, and people don't pay attention. They're on the US highways and the railroads. But we're talking about a sovereign Indigenous nation that made a law specifically to protect ourselves from exactly this. And so right now, and to answer your previous question, as far as I'm concerned, we have not received a direct response from the president. We posted it on our social media because that's his way of communicating with us. And I also emailed it without any response. But one of the entities at Navajo who is working on this is the Navajo EPA. And I think they're doing okay. I think they're doing a pretty good job with what they have. And then Navajo DOJ. So EPA and DOJ, and I'm sure other council people and others will also pick up the slack, because the 3 people that were listed on that tribal commission for Navajo, or the communication for our people, I believe, is the Navajo Nation president, the vice president, and the TIPO, which is the Tribal Historical Preservation Officer. And so these are the three individuals who should have been alerting their staff, and then they could in turn communicate with the various chapters and local community people, maybe put a announcement on KTNN or whatever the tribe needs to do. So as far as I'm aware, none of these three, I mean, they have not responded to any of my emails. So, and the others who could be also involved are the Navajo Nation Washington, D.C. office, who probably made some decisions regarding the national monument. Because when I talked to the Navajo vice president, before the monument was signed, she said they were not informed about the valid existing rights. So how could they sign off to something if they weren't fully informed? I mean, this violates, FPIC, the Free Prior Informed Consent under the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the OAS DRIP as well. So Organization of American States Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So, I mean, these are flagrant violations of not just the trust responsibility, but also these are direct violations of let's say, racial discrimination, that a government entity made these decisions that can, I mean, I'm going to use the word genocide, that can effect genocide. I mean, this is part of what the Havasupai statement was calling out, that it threatens their entire existence. As Diné people, we have, we're in a different situation. But if you look at all the various tribes around the mine and along the haul route, some of them are really small. They don't have the clout as Navajo Nation. They don't have activists like Klebanali chaining himself to equipment and things like that. And so for us as Diné organizers, we have an amazing team. I can't thank them enough. Our team members are the only people doing monitoring. Our website updates are a little bit slow, but yeah, we're trying our best to get out to the chapters. We're going in person. This is what the federal government has been told time and time again. You have to come to our meetings in person. Don't send an email to the president. We're never going to see it. That doesn't make any sense, but they check their little box. If we don't request tribal consultation or whatever, I mean, the whole system is flawed. And so I can go on about these bad examples, but basically to answer your question, I am trying to understand what is that chain of command, when I get a picture that shows they reached that, when somebody sees the trucks moving, at this point, that's where we're at. If they start moving uranium and they didn't tell anybody, or they sent it to somebody who's not watching their email, or the US Forest Service emails us a day late. All of these things have already happened, and Hall No has caught them violating their permit, their plan of operations more than once. And so Energy Fuels has, as far as I know, has never been fined or in any way limited in their operations, despite puncturing an aquifer and spraying contaminated uranium water into Forest Service lands, or moving uranium on US highways in trucks marked for something else, So all of these things that have already happened, there should have already been measures in place, either by the governor of Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, maybe the US Forest Service. I mean, why were none of these things considered when they signed the national monument? If they're going to allow valid existing rights, if they're going to make this huge compromise, people are patting themselves on the back that, oh, we stopped thousands of uranium mines, potential mines that probably never would have been started. But the ones that are allowed to go through, those are the ones that those are obviously, we're in red alert right now, and those are the ones we're most concerned about. It's great they stopped thousands of uranium mines, but when that happened, this national monument, it made everyone think they stopped everything. And then it made folks stop fighting. It made people unaware of the urgency and the threat of Pinyon Plain. And on top of that, it invisibilized the fight. And so now that the mine started, people are waking up again and they're like, oh yeah, I heard about this. Or, oh, I didn't know a lot of people are saying, I didn't know they can go through. I thought they were stopped. So we're having to correct the information and then also encourage folks to research for themselves what they can do within their limited jurisdiction and encourage folks to think outside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so much that I'd love to talk to you about, but I know that we have to wrap up here. And I would recommend that folks check out the Hall No website, hallno.org. That's HAUL no.org, as well as on Instagram. There's so much important information, particularly historic information, which you touched upon here and there about what happened through the course of the nuclear colonialist history of the United States. But Leona, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. And besides the places that I mentioned, are there other ways that people can keep up to date and plug into what y'all are doing?
Yeah, well, we're, going back to the beginning of our call, this is a global place of interest. I think everyone in the world has an opportunity to take a piece of the, take a piece of the pie, help us fight it, do your own work. Hall No is not responsible for, orchestrating everybody. What we can do, what we're doing within our capacity and our focus is to educate our own Indigenous peoples. That's foremost. That's the number one thing we're working on now, is protection of not just Diné people, but all of our relatives in the area. And so that work, we could use support if people want to donate. There's a lot of driving, but I think internationally or nationally, we will be making calls to action for, in the future. You can go to our website, hallno.com. But I do think there are key decision makers. I'm going to invite folks to just Google them and write a letter to some of these folks. I mean, there's the governor of Arizona. We have obviously President Biden, President Biden, who signed the monument. And there's others, but I think yeah, we have a lot of folks to ask questions to, how did this happen on your watch? Why did this happen? If the whole idea to protect the Grand Canyon, this monument was to protect the Grand Canyon. So how did this happen? I mean, is it a failure? Is it a federal failure? I think these are good questions to ask our federal elected officials.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Leona, thank you again so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.